And so some of them fall through the cracks. And the ones that really hurt us the most are the ones that, because they're under close supervision in the field, even though they're injured, they can still perform. But when they come home back in garrison, they're back home, and the pressures of home that complicated, or they're in garrison and living in quarters, and they're alone, and then the boogeymen start coming back. And there are too many who within the first weeks of coming back kill themselves. Because that supervision is just not there anymore. And so we're not sure how to handle that one. Yes?
You mentioned how you obeyed the order and how not avoiding that way. But one really poignant aspect of the book that made sense to double was the order, or the UN to Kofi Annan back and asked to collect the weapons to destroy them before the Inter-Army could actually proceed with their plot. That order, it seems that you did follow. So what is the effect of that, of obeying the wrong order? Because it seems like that is not only the case with you, but also with many of our vets that came back from Vietnam and other places.
That's a very interesting point. Looking at obeying a wrong order. I hadn't seen it that way in the past, but brutally, that sort of, in a raw way, you'd sort of say that was it. The mandate is a peacekeeping mission, and I had no authority to either gather intelligence, because I'm there, because both sides want us there, nor to take any offensive operations. So I knew there were arms caches, I knew they would use them, I knew there was training of people, and so I wanted to raid those caches. And so what I did is I informed my higher headquarters that I was going to implement these raids. And the higher headquarters came back and said, you are not authorized to do that. What you got to do is tell the people that you know about it, and they're to sort it out. And so I had choices then. I could have simply said, well, they don't agree with my concept, and I believe fundamentally we got to do the raids, and so I'm out of here. So I could resign. In my opinion, resigning in the face of the enemy when your troops still have confidence in you is desertion. Easiest road to take. And we've seen it in Yugoslavia and other places. The other option that's left to me is to let it go. Say, well, I tried, lost, and will live with the consequences. That is irresponsible. So the third option is the one I took, and that is you harass the living daylights out of your headquarters until they see your way. And that's exactly what I did. And I wrote, and I discussed, and I argued with them for weeks on end, and they finally agreed. Problem is, we ran out of time. And the conflict then exploded. And so your loyalty is to your mission as well as to your troops. And you're not allowed abandoning either. But that doesn't mean because you're in friction with one or the other that you simply cave in. On the contrary, that is the impetus for you to fight. And so I wasn't fighting the belligerents, I was fighting my headquarters. And they finally agreed. And that's the way you do it. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Family members of those that return with PTSD.
In 1997, when we started the reform, we created an advisory board. It took till 2004 to produce a report called the NERI report that recognized that the families had to be brought into the process. We got legislation, a bill through, which created a new charter, which I squired through the Senate in 2005, and in 2006 we started to implement it. But the civil servants had managed to extract from it the whole side of protecting the families and helping families, because the families fall under the provincial system and not the federal system. So we are now arguing that if you commit an individual, you are committing the family. So it's not just having Veterans Affairs to take care of the individual. Veterans Affairs has a responsibility to the family, because the family has been committed. The family has been injured. And you are not allowed to divorce the two. That's not an authority you have. And so if you can't divorce them, then you've got to provide that support. And that's what we're fighting right now. It's a jurisdictional problem and financial one too. But it is fundamental to guaranteeing that we can bring back soldiers to a level that they are still functional and not lose them, or avoid not only suicides, but massive family breakups and things like that. Yes?
We don't have, back in the UK, we don't have a Department of Veterans Affairs. So the TAM for the military leaving and coming back to the civilian community is picked up by a disparate group of charities. They're huge, they're enormous, but what happens is that service that they receive when they come back is still enabling a lot of people to slip through the cracks with homelessness, drug and alcohol, mental health problems undiagnosed. If I try to refer somebody to see a psychologist with regards to PTSD or combat operational stress or whatever you want to call it, that'll take me 12 to 18 months, which is far too long. The criminal justice system within the UK has a huge proportion of people who are ex-forces in the system. What I'm trying to do over here now is look at various projects as part of this Winston Churchill Traveller Fellowship, and I'm going back to argue the case that we should have a Department of Veterans Affairs, and also we should have, as you guys do, a specific military social work team here, actually driving this through. Give me some words of wisdom on how I go back and here, so they know what to do. Because
The British are asking the colony to do that?
But you and I would be lone voices within trying to argue for this. What you've just wonderfully and articulately done. I've been trying to say for weeks and getting nowhere. But I come from no rank whatsoever. Mine was a short, brief, and probably dishonourable service time.
Yeah. Well, we had Veterans Affairs taking care of the World War II veterans and the Korean veterans, but not the new generation veterans. So they were getting no support from them. And so we had to bring in a whole new charter. The old charter was dated 1943 during World War II. So we had to bring in a new charter, and even there it's got some serious problems in it. We also then, to fill a void, created what we call family support centers, and that have all the services from babysitting to suicide counseling to assisting spouses getting employment, to helping them go through the system to get the care, medical care, and filling out the forms and all that kind of stuff. That also wasn't found to be sufficient. And what we also discovered is that the soldiers, when they were injured and so on, didn't want to leave the forces, because you instill in them loyalty from day one. When the uniform comes off, loyalty doesn't disappear. In the early 70s, we cut massively our forces, and we still had some Korean vets with us at the time. And so we threw a whole bunch of people out in less than 3 months. About 2 years, going on 3 years later, we started to hear about so-and-so had died. Jesus, you did right. And so-and-so had died. And we discovered that they were dying of a broken heart because they were not able to reintegrate into the society because of what they had gone through and also the way of life. And so we decided we realized that people didn't want to leave the forces even though they were injured. So how do you employ people who are injured in the forces to start with? And then how do you make the bridge between the forces and either Civvy Street or Veterans Affairs? Because we discovered that Veterans Affairs were not taking care of the soldiers with the same sense of loyalty and commitment as the people were doing in the military. Our military social workers, military support staff, and so on. And so we're right now trying to balance the two out. And one, make the bridge, and ensuring both sides are doing the equivalent. And I don't think there's any way around it. Going with ad hoc NGOs and organizations hoping for the best is a level of irresponsibility that's extraordinary. We couldn't believe, and the British have sent people over to Canada to look at some of the stuff. So I don't know who's doing it right now. Yeah, thank you.
I think we have two more questions.
Okay, two more. Sir.
First of all, gentlemen, thank you for your service to your country and community. I'm a veteran myself. I have about 19 years of service, and like I said, my last theater was Death Storm you were speaking about, you use officers in a generic sense, where I'm thinking, okay, every time I was in here, the officers was in CP. In EA, SEO, we hit the ground, suffered a lot of, non-troops suffered a lot of mental illness, mental injuries or physical injuries. And I'm just thinking when you were stating that, are you speaking generic in a sense? When you were saying officers, although you commanded a lot of officers, but under those officers, a lot of enlisted.
Yeah, that's a very good point. The doctrine of use of your force, although we're all within NATO and had a lot of interoperability, are different. So the scale of use of officers, let's say in the US Army, is different than the Canadian Army, which is based a lot more on the old British Army. So the officers are far more out there and more in numbers than within US forces. However, the NCO cadre, which is better educated than it used to be, much better, and are taking on more responsibilities, fall within the strata of the leadership structure of the forces. And so those dilemmas are, yes, lived by the NCOs as well as the officers. The question, though, is that to what scale are they lived? The NCOs are handling it at the platoon level, the company level, and so on, and working their field and exercise, as the junior officers are, and they're deployed with you. But I'm talking about the senior officers. I'm talking about the general who's got to interpret the rules of engagement, who's got to write the concept of operations, who's faced with these dilemmas of what use of force and how much and can you use force, and is seeing his troops put into harm's way or at risk. That level, that scale of dilemma is off the chart. That's where I'm going at. So I'm far more going above the battalion commander even. I'm going at the level of senior officer. And if the senior officers who are operating without that doctrine, you know, when we did the Cold War and NATO in the Cold War, it was a war, we had a war doctrine. In the US, their war doctrine was Clausewitzian. So we knew the fundamentals of what war meant and how we would prosecute war. But in this era, which is not war, and it ain't peace, but it's conflict. How do you resolve conflict? When you can't go in, you know, as the old days, the diplomats look at the problem, geez, we can't solve it, call in the generals, generals order the youth of the nation, fight, beat up the other guy, and then we'll go in and we'll repair it, and then we'll carry on. You know, the classic sort of phased approach. Well, today, Afghanistan, it's all at the same time. General Petraeus has got to work with the NGOs, he's got to work with the development people, he's got to work with the political people, he's got to work with the security, the locals, he's got to work with all the nation builders. They all got to work at the same time. And so what we're looking for, and this is a whole different lecture I got, is a whole new conceptual base to conflict resolution, meaning new tools, new lexicon, and also multidisciplinary leaders. A general who knows only how to fight is useless, because that's the fundamental argument. First, you must be a warrior, and a warrior ethic. Because if you're not credible at that, you will never be able to protect people in extremis when you have to use force. But it's from there onward that the era we're in, to be part of the solutioning of these problems without having to go kinetic all the time. And that means in 1999, when I was brought back temporarily for a while, I was given the job of looking at the reform of the Canadian Officer Corps. And what we discovered is that we needed a whole new set of knowledge, skills, and experience. That is to say, not be experiential on drills and how to use deployment, but be more intellectually based, to understand the problem. So we want our officers to learn anthropology, sociology, philosophy, so you can figure out what the hell's happening and then adjust accordingly and keep the weapons as far back as you can in order to do that. Well, that whole new generation thinking isn't on paper yet. Afghanistan is still on-job training. And so we've just started in this era. We've been at it for about 20 years. The old era, we'd been at it for centuries. So we had the old one aced. The new one, we're still trying to figure. So when your general officers, they're in there commanding their troops, and they're saying, geez, are my troops ready to handle this problem? When he himself is having a problem comprehending the full breadth of it and the solutions of it, well, you can imagine that trauma, particularly when the mission fails or you have catastrophic failures. So that's, and that's my short answer on that one. One more? Yeah? Yeah, go ahead.
Governments increase their reliance on independent contractors like Blackwater. Is there any programs in place to try to address legislation for those contractors to institute care for the soldiers that they release?
These are the contractors to... Oh, the security companies. Yeah. Yeah. My first reaction is that we should, to be very vulgar, shit-can the whole bunch of them. We should have never tolerated the creation of those artificial mercenaries. Never. I find it a fundamental ethical problem in the NGOs who refuse to have soldiers provide them protection because they need that neutral space and that sort of independence from the military, but they'll hire a whole bunch of security companies who operate with no rules of engagement, no ethos, and no loyalty than the paycheck. And so, first of all, we should get rid of the whole damn lot of them. Secondly, they are full of ex-military who are, in the vast majority, hurting as veterans. And there's no programs within them, and we've insisted on none. I mean, the United States has got nearly 30,000 of them in Afghanistan. There is no program to make sure that these guys are not wackos, to make sure that they're actually being taken care of, that the ones that are off the deep end are pulled back. And that, I think, is another demonstration of extraordinary Pontius Pilate by governments. They can't handle casualties in uniform, so we'll hire them, we'll let them get out of uniform, we'll hire them off, and whatever happens to them, well, too bad. We're paying them big bucks. That's incredible. That is absolutely incredible, ethically. And we're letting them get away with it. So thank you for raising that. Okay.